going to make apple lasagna. Sounds like an interesting combination. But if you've ever had a Jewish kugel, you might have had a fruit and a noodle or a pasta mixed together with some eggs, and that's basically what it is. You can serve this lasagna for breakfast. It'd be a great breakfast. You could serve it for brunch, lunch, or dinner, whatever you'd like. Okay. So without further ado, we're going to get to the ingredients. These are Macintosh apples. I used Macintosh apples because they're in season in Massachusetts this time of year. You could use any apple you had. A tart apple would be great. Even a mixture of apples would be good. Okay, so I used Macintosh. I've sliced them and I've coated them with lemon juice. So that'll keep them, number one, a little tart, and number two, it'll keep them from getting too brown. If they get brown, they're perfectly edible. It's just a case of the air or the oxygen getting there and oxidizing the apple. Okay, so what I want to do, I want to mix some sugar in with my apple. Now that's an interesting concept. What would happen, do you suppose, if I didn't mix sugar in my apple? Well, what would happen is it would turn to applesauce. If you do not mix sugar in with the apple ahead of time, the apples will break down and they will turn to sauce. They will turn to mush. Putting the sugar in the apple actually keeps the apple in shape. So if you have a pie and you cut into your apple pie, you need to put sugar in that apple pie to make sure that the apples stay in their shape that they're intended to be in. If you don't, your apples will mush. So that's interesting. Anyway, so these are apples. All I've added is some sugar, okay? And I have some lemon in there to keep them from turning brown. So that's my apple part of my filling. I'm also going to be making a cheese filling. I've softened some cream cheese, about an 8-ounce package of cream cheese, okay? And I've gotten it really soft so that I can just whip it. I'm just using a fork. You don't need to use any special tool. You don't need to have an electric mixer unless you want to, okay? And I'm going to add some various ingredients to this. I've got some salt. You definitely need, with sweet foods, you need some salt to keep it from being too sweet. Okay? And I have some eggs. I've beaten 3 eggs. That's actually going to help bind the mixture. Okay, and I've beaten them slightly. If you have lumps in this, it's okay though. So that's nice. If your cream cheese needs to be soft, but if it's not quite soft, it's okay. I've got some brown sugar here, which is going to give it some lovely color, caramelized flavor, and sweetness. Okay, it's starting to look good already. Okay, so I've got brown sugar. I've got white sugar. Sprinkle the white sugar in there. And I have some spice. I have some cinnamon. If you liked a different spice, you could use that. You could use some nutmeg or ginger, but I like just the cinnamon. And if I see a recipe in a recipe book, I always like to double the cinnamon because I really like cinnamon. And I think it just has a nice flavor. So that's a tip I always use. I always kind of double the cinnamon. So I'm going to mix this mixture. If you can see, if I have a few lumps, that's not going to hurt anything. I'm smashing my lumps with my fork, and it's looking creamy and good. Okay. And the next thing I'm going to add is some sour cream. Okay. This is a nice, rich dish, and it's not necessarily for those who are on a cholesterol-free diet, but a little piece wouldn't hurt you. It's okay. Okay. So there's some sour cream, and it's going to make the mixture very creamy. Now, you might wonder, in this lasagna, there's no water, there's no real sauce here. Where am I going to get my moisture from? Well, I'm going to get my moisture from my apples, and I'm going to get that from the cheese as well. And if I have a few lumps in here, all the better, because then I'll get a nice big bite of cheese when I bite into it. That's okay. So I've got that all mixed up, okay? And I'm going to start assembling my lasagna. When I assemble my lasagna, I want to make sure I put my apples in the pan first. I've greased a 9x9 square pan. If you wanted to make a bigger pan, you can. And I've pre-cooked my noodles. You want your lasagna noodles cooked, but not cooked to the point where they are mushy. Okay, so I want to measure my lasagna noodles. I want to make a square pan because it's so rich. I'm not going to make it that big of a pan. But again, if I wanted to use a bigger pan, I would. I'm just going to measure my noodles so that they fit into the pan. And then I'll be able to use these little bits for other things, and I'll show you how you can use those later. I could, in fact, overlap the noodles a little bit, and I'll show you how we're going to do that. But the first layer we're going to do, I've greased it, and I'm going to put a few apples in there. You want to cover the bottom of the pan with apples. Okay? So that you make sure that the apples are first. All right. Then we're going to add our noodles. So I'm going to put the noodles, I want them to overlap because I don't really want there to be a gap here. If your noodles aren't quite perfect, no one's going to notice. I won't tell. You'll be able to use the smaller noodles on a later layer. The next thing I'm going to add is I'm going to add my filling. So I'm going to just pour this over the top, almost like a sauce. If I have a few lumps, like I said, that's okay. Looks ooey and gooey already, doesn't it? That looks sticky and gooey. I can't wait to dig in. Okay, if you get a few dribbles, we'll just clean it up at the end. That's fine. Next layer, then, we're going to do some more apples. Okay, I used about 6 to 8 apples. I used 8 because they're small, but you're really going to have to kind of eyeball this. That's not an exact measurement for the apples. You don't have to cover the whole layer here with apples, but if your apples are small, you'd use more. And I'll show you what to do with the leftovers to make it good if you have a few leftovers. That's okay. Okay. So again, I'm going to cut my noodles to fit my pan. And this time I'm going to take the noodles and I'm going to put the noodles in a different direction. That actually helps give the pan of lasagna structure, and it will help the lasagna hold together at the end. And see how I'm overlapping them again. Now, if I wanted to in this particular layer, it's a lower layer in the pan, I could piece my little pieces together and just use them like this. And I can just put them in there like they're whole noodles, because nobody's really going to notice those at all. The top layer now, you want to have really pretty noodles on the top. Okay. All right, our next layer is going to be apples again. So we're going to put a few apples on the next layer. I'm doing this because what I want to do is I want to finish with the cheese so it gets all bubbly on the top. After the noodles, we're going to put the layer of apples. They're getting a little wet. That's not going to hurt anything. You can spread them around with your fingers, but I'm being proper and polite today and using my spatula. Okay, now I'm going to pour some more filling on top. Drizzling right on top so that I make sure I coat every surface. And again, if you have those little lumps, do not be alarmed. That'll melt right into the lasagna. Okay, that looks good. Almost like apple pie, but a little different. Okay, my last layer, I want to have really pretty lasagna noodles. So I'm going to have whole ones. I don't want to use those little half sheets on the last layer. Okay, so I'm going to overlap them. Again, I'm switching the directions, which helps the structure of the lasagna. Have you ever made a lasagna and the thing falls apart and all the stuff goes everywhere? Well, that actually helps it if you just stagger the direction that you put the noodles in. Okay. Now, I'm going to go ahead and use my fingers because it's going to be baked. I am overfilling this a little bit, but don't be alarmed. I'll show you what we're going to do to prevent it from overflowing. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my last layer of cheese on next. I'm reversing the order a little bit at the end here because what I want is I want my cheese bubbling on top, but on the other hand, I want to be able to see what's inside my lasagna. I'm kind of a firm believer if you look at something, you want to know what's in it. So I'm going to finish off with a few apples, and I'm going to actually put my apples in kind of a nice order here. And I'm going to use my fingers. I want my apples to be pretty, and they're going to caramelize and brown. Okay? You see how I'm arranging them like that? You don't have to do this. In fact, you could put your little initials on there. If you have a little child at home, you can have the little child rearrange them in a flower or whatever you want. You could do any way you want. But I like to look pretty at the end. So you're going to get your cheese bubbling through those nice sliced apples. Okay. I only have a few more apples to do. And if you'd like to, you could actually sprinkle a little extra sugar or brown sugar on the top. What we're going to do, though, is we're going to do a topping at the end, and I'll show you how to make that in just a sec. See how pretty that looks? Okay. Now I really want to cover my pan with some foil so it gets a nice steam going on it. As you can see, it looks just like that. Really pretty. And I'm going to cover it with foil. Now when you're baking this lasagna, you want to make sure that you put something under it in case some of that liquid leaks through. So I'm going to put it into the pan with the foil on top, and I'm just going to pop it in my oven. Before I make my topping, I wanted to show you what would I do if I had any leftover noodles. Well, there's all kinds of fun things you could do. You can certainly make another pan of lasagna, because when you make a box of noodles, you don't use them all usually. But if you wanted to, you could take these apples and make a little apple roll-ups. You can roll them up and make little individual lasagnas, and then top it with a cheese topping and bake it like that. And that's kind of nice if you have a one-person or a two-person is home and you don't want to make a whole pan of lasagna. Just make little lasagna rolls, and I can spoon my cheese on top and bake it like that. Okay, the next thing I want to do is I want to make my topping. Now, while my lasagna is in the oven, I'm going to have that covered. When I am done taking my lasagna out, I'm going to take my lasagna out, and then we're going to put our topping on, and we're going to let our topping brown. Now, I'm going to use flour today, some butter. Okay, I've got my butter soft. I'm going to take a fork, and I'm going to smash my butter. But the best tool with this is your fingers. Honestly, you want to crumble. It's almost like an apple crisp or an apple crumble. Okay, so I have my butter and I have some flour. I guess if you wanted to use some whole grain flour, you could definitely do that. And if you had oatmeal, you could use that in here. I'm going to sprinkle a little cinnamon on top. I like cinnamon. And some white sugar. Okay, and it looks like that. And the best tool to crumble this with is not a fork, because you'll be there all day. It's your fingers. It's going to bake anyway, that's okay. I give you my permission. Okay, you want it to be a crumbly mess. It looks like peas, little coated peas. And I'm just crumbling with my fingers, if you can see what I'm doing. And then I'm going to set that aside until my lasagna is all baked. Now, most of my ingredients aren't cooked in there, so it's going to bake for a good 45 minutes. And we're going to take that out of the oven. Again, put the topping on top, brown the topping, and then we'll be all done once it's brown, and we'll get to eat it. Well, look, our apple lasagna is all done, and it's all caramelized and good on top. Our crumble turned out really nice. We have some nice brown edges, and sometimes if I'm having something like that, I might like to have some whipped cream, but the way I like to do it is I like to take a little bit of cream and drizzle it right on top to make it look really gooey. This is just heavy cream. You can see the lasagna, it looks like that, and I'm just going to drizzle the cream on top, and that way it soaks in. Doesn't that look delicious? Nice warm cream, and that would make a lovely lunch, breakfast, or a brunch dish. In fact, it could be a nice light supper right before you go to the theater or something like that. Enjoy. Cabbage is another fall vegetable that's great to use cold or hot. So I've got some coleslaw that I'm going to make. I've got some cabbage that I've pre-shredded in a food processor. You can certainly cut it with a knife, or you can use a hand grater or a box grater, but I've done it the easy way in the food processor. And I've got some salt here. When you have cabbage, and a vegetable even like zucchini, what you want to do is you want to salt the cabbage ahead of time so that you can get some of the flavor of the salt in the cabbage, and you can also get some of the water out, which actually helps flavor the dish. So I'm stirring my cabbage with my salt and pepper ahead of time, and I'm going to let that sit while I'm working on my dressing. This is a very, very easy recipe to do, and it tastes a little better if you make it ahead of time, but you do not have to. If you let it sit, sometimes the water comes out of it a little bit, and you can get a little bit more flavor. Now you can get this cabbage shredded ahead of time if you like. A lot of people like to buy the pre-made shredded cabbage. I don't think that gives you the nice texture this does, and I don't think it has the flavor. It's a little dry, So if you need to use that, then I would add a little bit of extra liquid if I were going to do that. But this is a fresh cabbage, and that's what we're after. We're after those nice fall vegetables. Okay, so then next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of chopped onion. I like a little bit of onion in my coleslaw. Okay. Not a lot, because you do not want it to taste like onion. You want it to taste like cabbage. And just for some color, you want to put some shredded carrots in there. Now you could use purple cabbage. If you have it, Napa cabbage is wonderful. Napa cabbage is a great cabbage. It's very mild, so if you don't like that strong cabbage flavor, Napa cabbage is good. It's an Asian cabbage. It's green, and it has a nice flavor. Works really well in cooked dishes as well. So that's our mixture here. I'm going to mix that onion in there, so make sure it gets all that flavor in there. Okay, and I'm going to make a dressing now. Dressing is really easy. A lot of people would just buy this in the store. You don't need to do that. I'm going to take a glass bowl. I'm going to add about a cup of mayonnaise. You can use light mayonnaise. You could certainly use yogurt or light yogurt. Greek yogurt would be great in here. About a cup of mayonnaise is what I want. Okay, and you want about a quarter of a cup of vinegar. You want an equal amount of vinegar. I'm using cider vinegar, but any vinegar you had would be great. An equal amount of vinegar and sugar. And you can certainly adjust this to your taste. You don't want it to be necessarily sweet, but you want that nice sweetness that brings out the sweetness in the cabbage. So I'm mixing this up, and I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of prepared mustard. You could use Dijon mustard, dark mustard. You could use mustard powder, and that gives it a lovely yellow color. Okay. And then I'm going to mix my dressing into my coleslaw. Looks just like the jar, only better. You made it. It took you seconds, really. Okay. And I'm going to drizzle my salad dressing over my coleslaw. If I didn't want to use this much mayonnaise and I wanted a little moisture, I could add some milk, or I could add some water to this. Now to get every drop, here's a little trick for you. I'm going to take my cabbage, I'm going to rinse it around in my dressing, and I don't have to scrape the bowl as much that way. Get all those good bits. Okay, and there's my dressing. I'm going to mix it with my coleslaw, and I'm going to let this coleslaw sit, and in a little bit, my dressing is going to pull out some of the water in the cabbage, and it's going to definitely create more of a dressing than what I see here, because of the water with the salt. And as I let it sit, the flavors are going to melt a little bit. And as I said, you could serve it now, or you could serve it later and let it sit in the refrigerator. You would definitely want to refrigerate this. It could be used for a summer party or a fall party. It's great on a nice turkey sandwich with some rye bread. You like that. And there you have it. You don't need to buy the coleslaw. You don't need to buy the cabbage. You do not need to buy the dressing. Homemade coleslaw. Today we're going to use our fall pumpkins to make a pumpkin squash curry soup. Most people would think of pumpkins in pie, but it can be a savory dish as well. So what I have here, I have some nice yellow onions, just sauteing in a large stock pot so that I can get a little bit of softness to them. To that, I'm going to go ahead and add beautiful peppers, some red and green beautiful peppers into this. And I'm going to get those soft as well. We're going to go ahead and add some diced squash to this. You could certainly use a butternut squash or, like I said, the mashed squash. I like a little bit of texture to my soup, but you don't have to have texture. You can always, again, change the type of squash. If you really wanted to, you could use zucchini squash. That would be another option. Look at that beautiful orange color we're going to get there. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and saute my squash a little bit. I want to get a nice caramelization on my vegetables. And once they get caramelized a little bit, I'm going to add my other ingredients like my liquids. Once you get the sugars coming out of the vegetables, then you'll be all set to add the liquids. Okay, so our vegetables are looking good. Now I'm going to go ahead and add a whole can of pumpkin. Look at the vitamin A we're going to get in this dish. This is just a can of pumpkin. It's nothing special. And it makes the soup very easy. But it has a wonderful flavor, and the smell, as soon as we add this curry powder, is going to really, really dazzle you. Okay. The other ingredients we have, I have some curry powder, some salt and pepper, and some nutmeg, which all kind of goes along with the pumpkin and squash theme. And for a little sweetness, we have some honey, which is going to help temper some of that hot and spicy curry. Now, if you wanted to use curry paste in here, you certainly could. And you could make it, you could use a garam masala instead of a curry powder if you like, whatever you have on hand. That worked out really well for me the other day. I'm going to add some coconut milk to give it some richness, and it also gives it a little sweetness and certainly lots of coconut flavor. We're starting to feel very tropical right now. This is looking really good. It has really pretty green and red color along with the orange, and now we're getting a creaminess to it also. Next thing we're going to add, which is really going to pop, is some diced tomatoes. Now, I've used canned tomatoes, but you can use fresh tomatoes if you have those. And that is going to cook for just a little bit until that broth gets nice and sweet and our vegetables get combined. All right, look how pretty that is. It's really, really pretty. Now, after a couple of minutes, you really, really want to make sure that you add some broth to this. So number one, it doesn't burn, and you get some nice texture and some nice consistency. So I'm adding some chicken broth to this. You could certainly use a vegetable broth or a mushroom broth, or even actually water would be fine. And you can get it to the consistency that you would like it. Okay? You can actually make this thin or thick as you would like. After a while, as it cooks, it's going to reduce. So I might add some more of my chicken broth to make it thinner. And I can actually adjust the consistency of my soup as I want to. And if I want at the end to have it really, really thick, I can add some of this cornstarch to the chicken broth, and I can mix them. I can make what's called a slurry. You would want to add that at the very end, because if you overcook cornstarch, it actually will thin right down afterwards, and that would be called breaking. So if you overcook cornstarch more than 1-2 minutes, it's going to break, and your sauce will be very, very, very thin, or your soup will be also. So I'm going to let this cook for a little bit. Now our squash and pumpkin soup is all done. Look at the wonderful colors we have. We have the red, the green peppers, and we have those lovely butternut squash chunks. And the final finish is going to be a little bit of heavy cream that I'm going to drizzle in here. It shouldn't curdle. If you used milk, now that would be a curdle mess. But the heavy cream should just lighten the soup up, give it some richness and flavor. And ooh, it smells wonderful. I smell the curry powder, and I smell the vegetables, and it looks very healthy. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to spoon some of the soup into a bowl for my friends, and I'm going to show you how we're going to garnish it. I like it the consistency it is, but again, as we talked about earlier, you could thicken it if you'd like, and you could even turn it into a puree by using an immersion blender or a regular blender. So I have the soup, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a few croutons on top of my soup, which will add a little bit of crunch. And for even further crunch, just a few toasted almonds. And there you have it, lovely butternut squash curry soup. If you have a whole bunch of fall and summer vegetables left and you have some corn on the stalks and you have some nice tomatoes coming out of your garden, I can show you how to make a lovely corn and tomato salsa. I actually cut some corn kernels off the cob here, and I had that left over. And I have some green peppers, which are very, very nice and very fresh. I have some fresh jalapenos that we grew in our garden this year. I have some red onions, which are great. And I have my beautiful leftover tomatoes, which are all over my house. And so I need a way to use them up, so I'm going to combine them all to make a lovely salsa. I've got some chips here, and we're going to have a fiesta. So the first thing I'm going to go ahead and do is mix my yellow corn. If I had white, that would be fine. And with my fresh tomatoes, they're all juicy, and I have cut them up. I want some nice chunk. I want some texture in this one. I don't necessarily want it to be a sauce. Some salsas are more sauce-like. This is a chunky salsa. Okay? So I've got the corn, and I'm beautiful green peppers right here. And I left them really rather large because I want to see them. You're starting to see that color there. It's beautiful. And I've got my red onion. For those of you who are a little squeamish, just add a little bit. If you like a lot, go ahead and add a lot. And you're starting to really see that color pop. And for the dark green, and for the spice lovers, jalapenos. I've left the seeds in here because some people like it spicy, but you could also take the seeds and the membrane out and not have it as spicy as it is. And you get the sweetness with the corn and the tomatoes. And all these vegetables are really sweet once you get them coated with the salt, and I'm going to use some lime juice. Even the onions have sweetness to them. So the next thing I'm going to go ahead and do is add some salt. What the salt's going to do is going to add some watery texture. It's going to draw the water out of those tomatoes, right out of those peppers, and you'll get some nice juices on the bottom. I like to take the juices and drink them. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a squeeze of lime for some sour quality. I like about a half a lime in mine, but if you wanted more lime, you could certainly use that. If you had lemons on hand, that would be a great option too. I'm going to go ahead and mix this up. And look at those colors we have from our fall vegetables in summer corn left over. And there you have it. Some corn and tomato salsa. The longer you let it sit, the better it is. Serve with some chips. Get the margaritas out. We're going to have a party.